next guest is Joshua Blank, and he's here to join us via Zoom. Joshua, thanks so much for being here with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great.
We're hanging in there as these numbers are coming in. We're very glad to see some of the numbers populating for us. But, as we're kind of setting the table with you, I'm wondering what you'll be watching closely as we're moving throughout this evening.
Yeah, I have sort of a list of things I might be looking at here. First and foremost, I'm curious to see what the overall turnout is. Early voting in Texas was really pretty astronomical this time. It's following a trend we've been seeing over a number of election cycles now where voters are tending to take the early voting option and run with it. And so we're seeing a lot of that. So we're going to see a very high turnout election here in terms of the number of voters. We'll see whether the rates compare to sort of some of these previous elections. So I'll be looking at that. Obviously, I'm curious about the margins at the top of the ticket, both, how Trump and Cruz do, who ends up doing better than whom, I think is an interesting question for me. I'm really interested to see how some of the trends play out in terms of voting that we've been watching sort of in the major metropolitan areas. In particular, I'm curious to see what the Republican vote totals look like. Democrats have really been able to increase their base vote over the last number of election cycles. And one of the questions is whether or not Republicans can find more voters in the state, given that they rely so much on older rural voters and more conservative voters. And the question is, are there more of them out there? So that's a big question. And then I think when it's all said and done, I'm really interested in looking at the exit polling and seeing, whether some of these stories we've been following about subgroups of voters really panned out when push comes to shove and people end up in the voting booth. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at, just a couple little things.
Quite the laundry list there, yeah.
So we've been covering the Senate race so far throughout this stream, and I wanted to ask you, what would it mean for Texas if we have an all-red win?
It would be a shockwave, to be quite honest. I don't think Republicans or Democrats would really be ready for it, to be quite frank. I think Democrats might find themselves in a little bit of a dog catches car situation. They would have this newfound platform in Texas, and they'd have to figure out real quick how they're going to use it, depending especially on the outcome of the other races. Additionally, I don't think Republicans are necessarily expecting an all-red win, and I don't think we should necessarily be expecting this to happen. It'd be a huge upset. But I think if it happened, there'd be a lot of finger pointing within the Republican Party here in Texas that's already, really become kind of known for finger pointing at each other. And so it'd be really interesting to see in the aftermath of that race, how Republicans with where they fell short, whether they solely blame Cruz, whether they blame each other, whether they're looking at, the national turnout operation of the RNC and whether it fell short. But ultimately, given the resources that Republicans have in Texas here, given the issue environment here, given the advantage they have in voters, if Cruz were to lose, it would be nothing short of an epic failure on their part.
Yeah, it would be incredibly shocking given the history of this races across the state. A Democrat has not won statewide in 3 decades, so it would be a notable shift for sure. Focusing on the presidential contest, too, we've obviously seen only early numbers coming in so far with former President Trump leading slightly over Vice President Kamala Harris. What will that tell you about the split in the vote once we get through all these votes that are counted, depending on how close that is? What will that tell you?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to be real cautious about overinterpreting early results. These are not random. We're not taking a random sample of precincts from the state and seeing, how the voters are falling. It just has to do with who's reporting their data more quickly to the Secretary of State and how quickly that information is getting uploaded to these various sources. And so, what we see right now, and this is true, and I should just say, whatever you're watching, whether you're watching Texas, the presidential race, the Senate race, whether you're watching national coverage, and you're looking at these states, you just have to remember that until we see, most of the vote coming in, and even in that case, you have to ask out, where is the outstanding vote still? We just don't know yet. And so I think that's the first part. I think the second question when we look at this race for president here in Texas is that whether or not, Trump wins or loses the race, the expectation is that he'll win. But what we are looking at is we're looking at the margins. We're looking at how well he was able to perform here. Ultimately, he won the race by about 9 points in 2016, by about a little less than 6 in 2020. And the question is he going to overperform, his last election here, or is he going to underperform that? And not only that in terms of the percentages, but how many votes is he going to end up actually winning this race by here in Texas? Because when you're thinking about, an increasingly competitive Texas, when you're thinking about the tens of millions of dollars that outside groups are pouring in from both sides, even in this election cycle, the continuation of that is to some extent predicated on how close the races keep getting. And so if Texas is only, a Republican state by a couple 100,000 votes, which is still a huge number of votes, it makes Texas a much more interesting place when candidates and campaigns are starting to game out what the next presidential cycle looks like, and even honestly what 2026 looks like.
Yeah, well, Joshua Blank, we appreciate you sticking with us. Has anything jumped out with you so far since we've seen very early results coming in, or are you just kind of in a position to wait and see?
I'm gonna be really boring, and I'm gonna say I want to wait and see. I mean, I see a lot of vote coming in.
I figured that's what you were gonna say. Yeah.
I know. I'm sorry. I have to be. If I'm gonna be on TV on election night, I'm gonna have to at least have some standards for myself, and I'm not gonna jump out there and start making all kinds of wild claims. But if nothing else, this is interesting because it's a high turnout election, and one of the things that I think Texas Democrats are going to need to start understanding is that for years they've been saying, if we have high turnout elections, we're going to win these races. Well, we've seen high turnout elections, and what we found so far is that Republicans are finding more voters as well. So the Democratic story is going to have to update if we keep seeing upwards of tens of millions of voters turning out, and we're seeing 60+% turnout, 66% turnout. Then the Democrats are going to have to look at the mirror and ask themselves, where are they falling short then?
Yes. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Josh. It was a pleasure to have you here on KXAN Live with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good luck with it, guys.
Thank you.